In 1816, a young Austrian priest named Joseph Mohr sat down to write a poem for his congregation. He wasn't aiming for a global phenomenon. He was simply a pastor trying to shepherd a people who were weary. They were living in the aftermath of a Napoleonic War, a time of economic hardship, political instability, and the literal cold as 1816 became known as the year without a summer. 2 years later, set to music by Franz Gruber, Silent Night was sung for the first time. Today, it has been translated into every virtual language on earth, even if you haven't stepped foot in church in decades. You likely know the words by heart. Silent night, holy night, all is calm, all is bright. As United Methodists, we are a singing people. Our founder, John Wesley, famously gave us direction for singing, urging us to sing spiritually and lustily. We love our carols because they shape our theology, but Silent Night has done something else. It has shaped our collective imagination of what that first Christmas would have looked like. We imagine a scene that is idyllic. We see a perfectly coiffed Mary, a stoic Joseph, a baby who, as away in a manger suggests, doesn't even cry when the cattle wake him up. We imagine a night where the air was crisp, the straw was clean, and the world was at peace. But here's the challenge: our lives seldom measure up to that calm and bright idea. For many of us, the season is not calm, it's chaotic. It's not bright, it feels heavy. We live in a world defined by adversity, darkness, and pain. We feel a deep gnawing disparity between the silent night on a Christmas card and the reality of our living rooms. We see the advertisements of happy families around a table, but we see the empty chairs where loved ones used to sit. We hear the music of joy, but we feel the weight of financial stress or the sting of a recent diagnosis. A study conducted by the National Women's Health Resource found that 2/3 of all women reported feeling depressed during the holidays. And if we are being honest, I suspect that number for men is just as high. We struggle because we feel like we are failing at Christmas. We think my life is a wreck, so I must be missing the point of the season. My Christmas isn't like the first one at all. Or is it? The musician Andrew Peterson wrote a song that serves as a necessary course correction for our sentimentality. It's called A Labor of Love. The opening line cuts through the frosted glass of our imagination. It was not a silent night. If we look at the Gospel of Luke with honest eyes, we see that Mary, for the first Christmas, was fraught with pain, disappointment, and bone deep exhaustion. Consider the context. Caesar Augusta, the emperor of Rome, cared nothing for a young Jewish girl in her third trimester. He decreed a census for the purpose of taxation and control. Because Joseph was of the house and line of David, they were forced to return to Bethlehem. Mary and Joseph were forced to make the 80 to 90-mile journey. And if you've ever been 9 months pregnant or lived with someone who was, imagine walking 90 miles. Imagine traversing mountains and valleys for 10 days on foot or on the back of a jarring donkey. This was not an easy journey. The first part is flat, but after that, it's uphill, traversing rugged terrain. There were more than likely tears shed on the road to Bethlehem. There was anxiety. Mary was a human being. She must have been terrified. Where will they stay? Who will help me? Will my child even survive the birth? Mary had likely planned to have her child in Nazareth, in a room added to her parents' home, surrounded by her mother and a midwife. Instead, she was a stranger in a crowded town. Forced to give birth in a place where people brought their sheep and donkey overnight, Luke tells us that she laid him in a manger, a feeding trough for animals. Most likely, this would have been located in a stable or a cave under or behind the house. In those days, people often stored their sheep there at the end of the day and kept their donkeys overnight to be tended. In other words, think of the place Mary gave birth as a first century parking garage. So let's be clear, this was not a sanitized nursery we see today. It was a place of animal dung. The smell of damp hay and the noise of livestock childbirth is messy, loud, and agonizing. The first cries of the King of Kings were literally joined by the braying of donkeys and the heavy breathing of a terrified mother. This is the profound truth. Mary was blessed by God. She was chosen, and yet God did not spare her from the mess. God does not promise that life will be easy, but Christmas tells us that in the midst of the noise and the disappointment, God is at work. If the world were already calm and bright, Christmas wouldn't be necessary. Christmas came precisely because the world is broken. Think about what the world is like right now in late 2025. We see news and we hear the rumors of wars. We see political polarization that has torn families apart. We see an epidemic of loneliness that the Surgeon General says is dangerous to our health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. We see a planet that is groaning under the weight of environmental crisis. In the very land where Jesus walked, Bethlehem, Gaza, Jerusalem, the silence of the night is shattered not by angels, but by the sound of conflict. When we sing peace on earth, it can feel like a bitter irony. But the Bible describes our condition, our sin, our brokenness, our despair in terms of darkness. As Matthew quotes Isaiah, the people who sat in darkness have seen a great light. And then John adds, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. This idea that Christmas brings light to the world was the inspiration for why we celebrate it on December 25th, because no one really knows the day Jesus was born. It is believed that early Jewish culture didn't celebrate birthdays. The early church chose the winter solstice, the night when darkness is at its peak. After months of nights growing longer and longer, the solstice is the moment the darkness is turned back. The heavens themselves declare the gospel. The light enters when the world is at its darkness. As United Methodists, our theology is built on the foundation of grace. John Wesley spoke of prevenient grace, the grace that comes before. It is the love of God that pursues us before we even know we need Him. Christmas is the ultimate act of prevenient grace. God did not wait for us to get our acts together. God did not wait for the world to reach a state of peace before He sent His Son. He entered into the noise, the filth, and the political tension of the first century. Jesus grew up to claim, I am the way and the truth and the life. Before we were called Christians, we were called followers of the way. This way is a radical departure from how the world operates. The world calls us to self-indulgence. Jesus calls us to self-denial. The world calls us to seek our own glory. Jesus calls us to seek God's glory. The world calls us to pursue riches. Jesus tells us that abundance has nothing to do with possession. The world calls us to demand justice. Jesus calls us to demand mercy. When the angels announced Lord to the shepherds, they weren't just using a religious title. Lord means master, captain, ruler. To follow Jesus is to let Him be the captain of our ship, especially when the seas are rough. When we follow His way, we find the joy we've been searching for. As Jesus said, those who lose their life for my sake will find it. Among the deepest existential need for every human being is the need to be loved. We all want to be known, yet we are terrified of being known because we fear that if people saw the real us, they would walk away. Christmas is God's answer to that fear. John 3:16 tells us, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only son." God is not a nameless, faceless higher power. In Jesus, God put on a face. He showed us what God is like, how he loves the broken, the outcast, and the questionable people. God knows your name. He knows the secret grief you brought into the sanctuary tonight. Others may have rejected you, a spouse, a parent, a child, but God never will reject you. The gift of Christmas is this unconditional, warmed heart love that John Wesley had experienced. It is the assurance that you are a child of God and nothing can pluck you out of God's hands. We cannot celebrate the manger without looking toward the cross. Christmas and Easter are inseparable. The baby born in Bethlehem eventually died and was raised to life. There is a darkness you walk through when you watch a friend or a loved one die, and you realize your own mortality. Where is your light then? The gospel tells us that Jesus died and rose again. He said, "I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live." Notice that Jesus didn't promise that you wouldn't get sick or have a tragic problem. What he promised was eternal life. His words don't always change our situation, but they change our perspective. We still grieve, but we do not grieve as those who have no hope. We celebrate Christmas because we remember the hope of the resurrection, the hope Mary had when she would see her son again. Our faith is not just about personal relationship with Jesus that we keep to ourselves. Wesley said the gospel of Christ knows no religion but social, no holiness but social holiness. If we receive the light of Christmas tonight, we cannot let it stay in this sanctuary. We have to be, we have a world that is crying out for hope. We need to refuse the division that the world is pushing us towards. In a world that wants you to hate your neighbor because of how they vote or what they believe, choose the way of Christ. Choose mercy over being right. Choose to see the image of God in the person you find the most difficult to love. We need to combat the loneliness epidemic that is happening. We are surrounded by people who are drowning in isolation. This week, I challenge you to reach out to one person, not with a text, but with a presence. Visit the neighbor who lives alone. Call the friend you haven't spoken to in years. Be the incarnation of God's love to them. We need to make sure that we are acting for the vulnerable. Jesus was born to a family fleeing political unrest in a place where they were homeless for a night. How are we treating the modern day Marys and Josephs? We need to support our local food pantries, our homeless shelters, and those who are working for peace in war torn regions. Hope is not a passive emotion, it is an active stance. To have hope is to live as if the light had already won. Life was never easy for Mary. She watched her son suffer and die. So let's go back to Mary in that cave. The shepherds have left. The cattle are lowing. The smell of the stable is strong. Joseph, he fell asleep in the corner, exhausted. Mary is sore, tired, and far from home. Her circumstances haven't magically improved. She's still in a barn. She still has to walk home eventually. But she holds that baby, the light of the world, against her chest. The darkness of the cave doesn't seem so dark anymore. She's found peace. She's found love. She has found hope. In that moment, for Mary, all was calm and all was bright. Not because the world changed, but because God was in the room. In a few moments, we're going to dim the lights of this sanctuary. We will light our individual candles from the Christ candle, and as that light spreads from person to person, filling this room, remember this: it only takes one small flame to defeat the darkness. Wherever darkness you walked in with tonight, depression, fear, loneliness, doubt, I invite you to bring it to the manger. You don't have to fix it first. You don't have to pretend it's not there. Just bring it to Him. When we, like Mary, hold Christ near our hearts, we discover that even in a messy, noisy, chaotic world, we can have a silent night. We can have a holy night because we have the only thing that truly matters. We have hope, the thrill of hope. The weary world rejoices. Amen.